She was a mail-order bride with nothing but hope, and on Christmas Eve, he looked at her like she was a blessing from heaven. Virginia, December 1886. The wind howled through the narrow alleys of the coal town like a hungry beast. Smoke from chimneys choked the gray skies, and the streets were slick with frozen mud. People walked fast, eyes down. No one lingered in the cold, and no one greeted Ada Merrick. She stood at the edge of the train platform, a single burlap sack at her feet. Her hands, red from the cold, clutched a folded paper that had already begun to wear at the edges. Her dress was threadbare. The hem had frayed from too many miles walked with nowhere to go. She was 22 years old, and already, her life had been shattered beyond recognition. At 18, she had married Thomas Merrick, a miner with kind eyes and a soft voice. He had promised her a home, something better than the half-rotted boarding house she had grown up in. For a while, it had been true. Then, 1 week after she discovered she was pregnant, the mine collapsed. She buried her husband in a pine box, with his name carved by hand. No savings, no widow's support, no kindness from the company. 6 months later, her daughter, Lila, was born small and sickly. She never stopped coughing, never truly smiled. And one cold morning, after a night of fever, Lila went still in Ada's arms. That was 3 weeks ago. The milk had not left Ada's body, only leaked into cloth and soaked the front of her dress, a cruel reminder that she was a mother to no one. People whispered behind her back. "She brings death," one neighbor hissed. "She cursed that baby," another muttered. The husband too. No one offered her food. No one lent her a blanket. And when her dead husband's family turned her out, she took only what fit in a bag: Lila's baby bonnet, a photograph, and the quilt she had sewn by candlelight. She had nowhere to go. But she still had one thing left: the hope that someone, somewhere, might want her. Ada applied to be a mail-order bride. It was a desperate act, but desperation had long since become her companion. She wrote 23 letters. Most came back with a single line, or none at all. Some were cruel. "I will not marry a woman who has buried a child. Your past is tainted. God does not bless the unlucky. I want no ghosts in my house." She read them all, then burned them. She cried once, then did not cry again. Then came a letter that was different. It did not say, "I love you." It did not promise roses or vows. It said, "I do not need a wife, but I have a son, 5 months old. His mother is gone. If you want a roof, I need someone to care for him." The name signed at the bottom was Barrett Cole, Wyoming. Ada stared at that letter for a long time, then folded it carefully and pressed it to her chest. It was not romance. It was not even safety. But it was a place, a purpose, a life that might be built, brick by slow brick, from ashes. She said goodbye to no one. The day she left, she walked 5 miles to the station in boots too thin for the snow. Her sack bounced against her hip. Her hands were raw, her lips chapped. The train loomed dark and heavy against the pale sky. As the whistle blew, Ada looked up. The wind sliced across her face like a warning. But she stepped aboard anyway. No one called her name. No one waved. Inside, the train was cold. She sat near the back, alone. Her breath fogged the glass as the town vanished behind her. Her fingers found the tiny bonnet folded inside her coat pocket. Ada closed her eyes and whispered, "Please let me be needed." Outside, the snow began to fall, and somewhere far west, a baby cried in the dark. Wyoming Territory, December 1886. The wind had a cruel voice in winter, sharp and constant, like a blade across skin. On the edge of the high plains, the Cole homestead stood hunched against the cold, a single cabin surrounded by frost-bitten fields and sagging fences. Inside, The wood stove hissed but gave little warmth. The firewood was low. The baby was crying again. Barrett Cole sat on the floor beside the cradle, his hands clenched in his lap, eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep. His son, Samuel, 5 months old, screamed with a hoarseness that rattled through the wooden walls. His tiny fists flailed in the air. The bottle of goat's milk lay abandoned nearby. Refused. Again. "I am trying," Barrett whispered. "I swear to God, I am trying." But Samuel did not understand. Samuel only cried. Barrett had not planned to be a widower at 31. He had married young, but late by town standards. Ella had been the only woman he had ever loved, the only one who ever looked past his silences and saw steadiness instead of coldness. She had died a month after giving birth, fever burning her from the inside, while he stood helpless at the edge of the bed, begging her to fight. He had buried her beneath the one pine tree on the hill and placed a small wooden cross in the frozen ground. Now, he was alone with a baby who would not eat, a barn with broken doors, and livestock that huddled for warmth in the wind. The hay was almost gone. The snow was piling high. Neighbors came by, once or twice. They offered casseroles and short visits. Some suggested he send Samuel away to the mission orphanage in Casper, just until spring. But Barrett had shaken his head. "I won't give him up," he had said. "He has already lost enough." Still, love did not warm bottles or make milk. He had tried goat's milk, cow's milk, boiled oats. Samuel turned his head and cried harder every time. So Barrett wrote a letter. Not to a sweetheart, to the agency. "I am not looking for a wife," he wrote. "I am looking for a woman who knows how to feed a child. Mine will not eat, and I do not know what else to do." He folded the letter, sealed it, and mailed it with hands that trembled from exhaustion. Weeks passed. Snow deepened. The house grew colder. Samuel grew thinner. Still, Barrett kept trying. He rocked the boy against his chest, sang broken lullabies in a voice that cracked, changed damp blankets, and walked the floor until his legs gave out. And when the baby finally slept, Barrett sat beside the cradle and stared into the flames, haunted by the thought that he was failing his son every hour of the day. But he never let Samuel sleep cold. Ella's old shawls were tucked around the crib, and the cradle sat closest to the stove. He kept the baby's head covered, his feet wrapped, and his hands warm, no matter how cold the cabin grew. He had not touched Ella's room. Her brush still sat on the dresser. Her apron hung by the door. It was both shrine and grave, and he could not bear to change it. That night, just 3 days before Christmas, the storm began. Winds screamed through the eaves. Snow slammed against the shutters. Samuel cried until his lips turned purple with effort, body arching from hunger and frustration. Barrett crouched beside the stove, one hand on the cradle, one pressed against his temple. "I am sorry," he murmured. "I do not know how to fix this." Samuel wailed louder. His tiny chest heaved. Barrett's vision blurred. He felt the moment his body gave out. His knees hit the floor. He lowered his head beside the cradle, arms wrapped around it like a fortress. And in the stillness, one thought circled through his mind. If that woman does not come, I do not know if he will survive this winter. Outside, the snow rose higher. Inside, the fire guttered low. Barrett closed his eyes and waited for a miracle. Snow fell like the sky was trying to bury the world. The wind howled through the cottonwoods, whipping drifts against the fence posts and half-covered barn. The lantern in the front window of Barrett Cole's cabin flickered, casting a trembling glow across the white. Inside, Barrett sat in the rocking chair, swaying back and forth with Samuel cradled to his chest. The baby screamed in hoarse, ragged cries, his body twisting with hunger. Barrett's arms trembled with exhaustion. His lips were pale, his skin drawn, his shirt was damp with sweat, his eyes red from days without rest. He whispered broken comforts into the baby's hair. "I know, son. I know. I would give anything, if I only knew how." Samuel kept crying. The wind hit the side of the cabin like a fist. The fire hissed. The woodpile was nearly gone. And then, 3 soft knocks at the door. Barrett froze. He shifted the baby, and stood slowly, knees stiff from fatigue. He crossed the room, and unlatched the door. Snow whirled in as he opened it. On the other side stood a woman wrapped in a threadbare shawl, snow clinging to her skirts and hair. She held a canvas bag, slung across one shoulder, its weight small. She looked younger than he expected, but her eyes were old with grief. "Ada Merrick," she said quietly. "From the letter." Barrett blinked, stunned. "You came." "I did." He glanced behind her, as if expecting a wagon, a trunk, something more. "Is this all you brought?" She nodded. "It is all I have." He stepped aside. "Come in." Ada moved into the warmth of the cabin, her boots dripping onto the floorboards. She did not shiver, though she had clearly been walking for miles. The baby let out another wail, sharp and hungry. Ada's eyes snapped to the child. Her expression changed, something deep and maternal flickering across her face. A quiet ache. "How long has he been crying?" she asked softly. "Hours," Barrett rasped. "Days, really. He will not take milk. He will not sleep." Ada set down her bag. She stepped forward slowly. "May I hold him?" Barrett hesitated, arms tightening instinctively. He looked at this stranger, her face drawn with fatigue, but her voice calm. Then he nodded and placed Samuel gently in her arms. Ada cradled the baby with practiced care. She whispered something too soft to hear, kissed the crown of his head, then sank slowly into the chair by the hearth. Barrett watched as she adjusted her shawl, shifted the baby's position, and lifted her blouse. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Ada guided the child, who latched with a desperate greed that silenced the room. Samuel stopped crying. Barrett stood frozen. His heart thundered in his chest. His son, his starving, exhausted child, was suckling, finally, peacefully. Ada closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks as she rocked gently. "I lost a daughter 3 weeks ago," she whispered. 6 months old. I still have milk. I did not know what to do with it, until now." Barrett sank to his knees on the rug, his hand to his mouth, eyes burning. He looked at the woman in his chair, her arms wrapped around his child, and for the first time in weeks, hope pierced through the darkness. "You," he choked, "you saved him." Ada met his eyes. "You saved me too, Mr. Cole. With that letter." The fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged. But inside the cabin, a hush settled. Barrett stood slowly, swallowed hard, and whispered with reverence in his voice, "You walked into this house on Christmas Eve, and I swear to God, Miss Merrick, you look like a blessing sent straight from heaven." Ada looked down at the boy in her arms. He was asleep, milk-drunk and warm. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile thread of something that just might become it. The fire had burned low by the time Ada stirred from the chair. She had not slept, not really. Samuel had drifted into a heavy sleep against her breast, but his skin still burned slightly to the touch. Fever. She had seen it before. She shifted him gently, resting him in her lap and unwrapping her shawl. Tearing the edge into strips, she dipped them into the basin of melted snow near the hearth, laying them across his tiny forehead and chest. Barrett watched in silence from the shadows near the fireplace, his body still as stone. His son had not made a sound since falling asleep, and it left him feeling hollowed out with relief. Ada looked around the cabin, cluttered, tired, lived in, and moved slowly to clear the corner near the cradle. She folded the blankets, wiped down the windowsill with the edge of her sleeve, then reached into her bag for one of her only keepsakes, a worn, child-sized flannel gown. She laid it over Samuel as an extra layer and then, with barely a pause, pulled off her own coat and tucked it around him too. She shivered, but said nothing. Barrett's eyes stung. He stood and quietly fetched another quilt from the storage chest. Ada looked up as he approached, then nodded. He draped it over her shoulders with care, then returned to the fire. He did not speak. He simply tended the flames, feeding in small logs to keep the warmth steady through the coldest hours of night. When Ada finally dozed, curled protectively around the cradle, Barrett noticed her coat had torn along the hem, some old rip made worse by the night's travel. He found his sewing kit, sat down at the table, and stitched the seam back together, knotting the thread with calloused hands used more to fencing wire than needles. The cabin stayed quiet until morning. When Ada woke, she found the coat neatly folded beside her, the tear repaired with sturdy stitches. She traced them with her fingers and smiled faintly. Later, as she held Samuel and walked gently across the room to keep him sleeping, Barrett broke the silence with a voice rough from disuse. "My wife died a month ago." Ada turned. She bled after the birth. The doctor said he had done all he could, but he came late. "We lived too far out." Ada lowered her eyes. "I am sorry. I buried her out back, beside the cottonwood tree." Samuel was 3 months old when she passed. Ada sat slowly. She shifted Samuel into the crook of her arm, watching his chest rise and fall. "I lost my daughter," she said. "Her name was Nellie, born early. Lived 6 months. I still don't know why she stopped breathing." Barrett nodded. "That's why you have milk." "Yes." He looked at her carefully. "And yet you came here." "To feed another child," Ada swallowed. "Because he is hungry, because I had nowhere else, and because maybe, somewhere in me, I thought helping him would mean she didn't die for nothing." Barrett lowered himself into the opposite chair. The fire cracked softly between them. He stared at the baby in her arms, his jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Then he said it without thinking. "You're an angel." Ada looked up. "What?" "I mean," Barrett hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "You walked in and saved him. That's more than anyone's done for me in a long time." Her breath caught. She pressed her lips together hard, but it did not stop the tears. "I've been called a curse," she whispered. "A bad omen. They said men died around me, babies too." Barrett shook his head slowly. "You are not cursed. You're the only reason he is still breathing." Ada turned her face toward the fire. The light made her tears glow like glass. No one had seen her as anything but a burden for so long. But now, in the quiet cabin filled with soft breathing and flickering warmth, she felt something shift. Someone believed she was a blessing, and in that moment, she believed it too. The first thaw of late December had barely touched the edge of the hills when the knock came at the door. Sharp, measured, too official to be neighborly. Barrett opened it with Samuel on his hip. The man standing there wore a dark overcoat, a bowler hat, and the kind of mustache that seemed designed to smirk. He did not remove his gloves. "Barrett Cole?" he asked. Barrett gave a slow nod. "That's me, Gideon Reeves, Territorial Registrar for mail-order bride contracts." He didn't wait to be invited in. His eyes swept the cabin like a hawk, scanning for something to pick apart. They landed on Ada by the hearth, where she knelt adjusting the baby's blankets. Reeves's mouth twisted into something close to a sneer. "So it's true." Barrett's brow lowered. "You came out here just to confirm I have a woman under my roof?" Reeves stepped closer, pulling a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I came to ensure legal arrangements were being followed. Your bride application was processed under the presumption of marriage within 10 days of her arrival. That deadline has passed." Barrett didn't answer. Ada stood slowly, wiping her hands on her skirt. She sensed something cold under Reeves's voice. The man's gaze settled on her with open scrutiny. Ada Merrick, widow, former resident of Pennsylvania, married at 18, widowed at 19, child deceased shortly after. Is that correct? Ada stiffened. Yes. I see. Reeves gave a mocking sigh. You know, miss, quite a few gentlemen turned down your application. Bad luck follows you, it seems. Barrett's voice was low and steady. That's enough. Reeves didn't flinch. You've brought an unmarried woman with a troubled history into your home. That has consequences. Such as? If you keep her here without legal marriage, you forfeit your winter support grant from the county. Feed and firewood subsidies, gone. And when spring comes, your land claim could be reviewed again. Nothing is guaranteed, Cole. Ada's face drained of color. She looked down at Samuel, asleep at last in the cradle beside the hearth. Reeves stepped toward the door. You have 3 days to provide a marriage certificate. Otherwise, I will file a report. He glanced back over his shoulder. You might consider whether you're protecting your son or jeopardizing him. With that, he left. The door closed softly behind him. But the silence inside the cabin felt louder than any wind. Barrett stood still, fists clenched. Ada turned away, walking to the corner where she had left her shawl. Her hands moved quickly, gathering her few belongings, the satchel, the empty bottle, the small cloth bundle of Nellie's things. What are you doing? Barrett asked. I cannot stay, she said, her voice brittle. You heard him. If I stay, you lose everything. Your land, supplies, your son's safety. Barrett took a step toward her. He is bluffing. Ada shook her head. You do not know what people like him can do. They whisper something in the right ears, and suddenly, it's over. She reached for her shawl, but Barrett moved faster. He blocked the door, eyes locked on hers. Don't you dare think you ruined anything, he said, voice thick. You saved my boy. You gave him life when I could not. No one else came. No one else stayed. I brought trouble to your door. You brought light into this house. Tears filled Ada's eyes. Barrett, stay, please. The words hung in the air like something sacred. Ada's breath hitched. She looked down at her hands, then back at the cradle where Samuel slept, his little chest rising and falling in the quiet. She had feared being seen as a curse for so long. But now, here was a man standing between her and the world's cruelty, not to protect himself, but to protect her. She let the shawl fall from her hands, and stayed. Ada stood by the chicken coop at first light, scattering grain into the frosted dirt. Her fingers were stiff, but her motions were careful and steady. The hens clucked and pecked hungrily, and the rooster crowed his approval. Across the yard, Barrett leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, silently watching her work. He did not offer help. He wanted her to find her own rhythm. After the morning chores, Ada returned to the cabin and set a pot to boil. She chopped potatoes and onions with practiced hands, stirring them into a stew while Samuel napped in his cradle. When Barrett stepped in, he sniffed the air and gave a quiet nod. Smells good. Ada smiled, just a little. The days grew into patterns. Ada feeding the chickens and goats, cooking meals, hauling water. She cleaned the stable, shoveled hay, and even braved scrubbing the horse trough. Each day, her sleeves rolled higher, her movements more confident. Barrett began teaching her things he had never expected to share with anyone again. One cold afternoon, he saddled the gentlest horse in the stable and led it to the yard. You'll need to know how to ride, in case of emergencies. Ada hesitated. I have never. I'll teach you, he said simply. He helped her into the saddle and walked beside her as the horse moved. His hand never left the reins, but he let her hold them herself. Ada laughed once, soft, surprised, and the sound made Barrett's chest ache. Later that week, he brought out an old rifle, handed it to her, and showed her how to load it. For protection, he said. She aimed clumsily at a tin can set on a fence post. Barrett stood behind her, adjusting her grip without speaking. On the third try, she hit it. She turned, shocked and pleased. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Ella died. That evening, Ada reached for a teacup on the top shelf and stood on tiptoe, fingers barely brushing it. Barrett noticed. The next day, without a word, he rebuilt the cabinet shelves, lowering them a few inches. He never mentioned the change. One morning, Ada stepped outside with a basket of laundry and slipped on the icy porch step. She cried out as her feet gave way, but strong arms caught her mid-fall. Barrett held her close for a breathless second. She clutched his coat, and their eyes locked, his dark with worry, hers wide with something like trust. "Careful," he said, his voice low. "Thank you," she whispered, breath fogging in the cold. They lingered a moment too long before parting. That night, the wind howled outside the cabin, and Samuel grew feverish. His tiny body burned in Ada's arms. She sat beside the hearth, rocking him gently, cool cloth pressed to his brow. Barrett hovered, pacing. "Should we call the doctor? He is just hot," she whispered. "I will stay with him." She did not sleep. All night, she rocked, murmured, soothed. The baby whimpered and moaned, but her hands stayed steady. Her lullabies were soft, almost like prayers. Barrett sat nearby, watching the candlelight flicker over her face. She looked exhausted but strong, entirely focused on the child in her arms. In that moment, something broke open inside him. She was not just a helper, not just a woman passing through. She was family. And though he said nothing, he knew the truth had settled deep in his bones. She belonged. The snow had come early that year, blanketing the hills and fields in soft white. The cabin stood warm and lit, windows glowing like lanterns against the cold. Inside, the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air, and laughter rose from a small figure bundled in wool. Samuel, now a year and a half old, toddled around the cabin with a wooden horse in his chubby hands. He giggled as he bumped into Ada's skirts, and she scooped him up, kissing his rosy cheek. Barrett stood by the hearth, watching them. The fire flickered in his eyes, but it was the sight of Ada and Samuel that warmed him most. He had spent the past week thinking, turning every thought over like a stone in his palm. At first, he had taken Ada in because he needed help. That was true, but not anymore. Now, he just wanted her. Not because she was capable, or kind, or strong, though she was all those things. He wanted her because his heart knew no home without her. She had become the rhythm of their days, the laughter in their meals, the quiet strength behind every solved problem. She had become his family, and now, he wanted to make it real. The day before Christmas, Barrett rode into town alone. The snow crunched under his horse's hooves, the wind sharp. He stopped at the jeweler's, then at the general store. He returned that evening with something tucked carefully in his coat pocket. The next morning, Christmas Day, dawned clear and cold. They opened a few small gifts by the fire. Samuel unwrapped a hand-carved toy train. Ada had sewn new mittens for Barrett. Later, while Samuel napped, Ada stood outside with her shawl drawn close, gazing at the snow. Barrett stepped out beside her, then gently touched her elbow. "I have something for you," he said quietly. She turned, puzzled. Barrett reached into his coat and drew out a small box. He opened it slowly, revealing a delicate silver necklace. At the center hung a single, tiny pearl, simple, unpolished, soft as morning light. Ada gasped, covering her mouth. "Barrett, it is not much," he said, voice gruff. "But I asked the man to shape it like a beginning, a fresh one." She blinked, tears rising. "I wanted to give you something that was just yours. That had nothing to do with loss." He reached forward, hands trembling slightly, and fastened the chain around her neck. "Barrett," she whispered again. He stepped back, then slowly, so slowly, dropped to one knee in the snow. Samuel stirred from inside, babbling from his blanket nest. Ada froze, hands clasped near her heart. Barrett looked up at her with everything he had ever been too scared to say. "You came here with nothing but hope," he said, his voice breaking. "And you saved this home." He drew in a breath. "Let me spend my life giving you everything you deserve." Ada's lips parted, but no sound came. Tears spilled down her cheeks, warm against the winter chill. She nodded, then whispered, "Yes." Barrett stood, and she met him halfway, arms going around his neck. Their foreheads touched, breath mingling in the cold. Inside, Samuel clapped his hands, without understanding why, and laughed. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, not because they were broken, but because they had healed. Together, the smell of warm bread filled the new cabin, richer than any candle, sweeter than any memory. Outside, snow dusted the ground like powdered sugar. A Christmas wreath hung on the door, simple pine and ribbon, but it meant everything. Samuel toddled across the wooden floor, cheeks rosy, voice clear as a bell. "Mama, Mama!" Ada laughed, kneeling down to scoop him into her arms. He giggled and buried his face in her shoulder. Her hair, longer now, shone in the golden firelight. Her face, once worn by sorrow, glowed with peace. Barrett leaned against the doorframe, watching them, a soft smile on his face. He held a folded wool scarf in one hand, the deep forest green she had once admired in town. "You are going to catch cold," he murmured, stepping forward. Without waiting, he wrapped the scarf gently around her shoulders. "There, that is better." Ada looked up at him, surprised by the tenderness, though she should not have been. With Barrett, gentleness always arrived without noise, like the snow. "Thank you," she said, voice quiet. They had built this cabin together, every beam and board. After the old one grew too small and drafty, Barrett had drawn the plans himself. Ada had chosen the curtains, the stove, the rocking chair by the hearth. It was not just a house, it was a beginning. Near the mantel stood a small shelf, plain but carefully polished. Upon it sat a wooden box, carved with roses. It was Ada's keepsake box, the one that held the blanket, the tiny booties, the name tag from the hospital. Barrett had made space for it himself, not hidden, not tucked away, but there, open, sacred. A quiet altar to the daughter Ada had lost, and to the strength she carried forward. She had not known he had kept it until the day he surprised her with the shelf. "I wanted her to have a place here," he said simply, "because she is a part of you." That had been months ago. Ada had cried in his arms for an hour after that. Tonight, candles flickered on the windowsills, glowing soft against the snow. A pot of stew simmered on the stove. Music hummed from a fiddle in the corner, gently wound by a crank and wheel. Barrett lifted Samuel into his arms, holding the boy against his chest. "You are getting too big for this," he teased. Samuel laughed, hands tangled in Barrett's beard. Ada watched them, her heart so full she could barely speak. They sat together by the fire, the three of them, wrapped in wool and quiet joy. No one needed to talk. The warmth said everything. Then Barrett turned his eyes toward her, candlelight dancing across his face. He reached for her hand. "Ada," he said softly, "you came to my door on Christmas Eve." His thumb brushed over her knuckles, slow and reverent. "And I swear, you looked like a blessing sent straight from heaven." Her breath caught. Not because the words were grand, but because they were true. Not every miracle came with trumpets or angels. Some came in a snowstorm, wearing worn boots, holding a baby in her arms. Ada smiled, tears rising without pain. She leaned her head against Barrett's shoulder, Samuel cradled between them. And in that quiet, holy stillness, the greatest truth of all settled over them. In the wild heart of the West, the real miracle was not survival. It was love. Found again. And chosen, despite everything. If Ada and Barrett's story brought tears to your eyes or a smile to your face, then you've felt exactly what we hope to share. That in the coldest winters of life, sometimes love and trust are the only flames that keep us warm. If this story moved you, hit that hype button for more heartfelt tales of resilience, romance, and redemption from the rugged frontier. Every week, we bring you a new story, not fairy tales, but raw, real, and deeply human love. Let your heart rest here, where the wind howls and hope endures. And remember, Christmas miracles still exist if you're brave enough to believe. See y'all next time.